Thanks to modern technology and more powerful equipment, forestry work is much less physical strain than it used to be. Rational techniques have also made the work significantly safer and more effective. This film shows the most important steps and techniques, using various different examples. Although many practical cases are very similar, the approach is not always 100% identical and has to be adapted to the individual situation and conditions. Work in the forest still involves a considerable risk of accidents. So as to minimize this risk, it's essential to know about the procedures and safety measures and how to operate the equipment, first and foremost the chainsaw. The appropriate type of saw must be chosen beforehand, depending on the type of trees to be felled. For small and medium diameters, that means one saw for felling and lopping, or two separate saws for larger diameters. The area must be cordoned off before starting. A basic prerequisite for one's own safety is, of course, the right safety clothing and equipment. That consists of a hard hat with goggles and ear protectors, a jacket, trousers with a cut-resistant lining, gloves, and safety boots. The fuel canister is deposited at a central place within the working area. Other supplies that are not in constant use can also be left here. You should also carry only essential tools on your belt. On selecting a tree, make a rough assessment of the direction of fall. Here you have to take into account the natural lean of the tree, the shape of the crown, distance to neighboring trees, wind direction, any snow load there may be, and vegetation that should not be damaged when the tree falls. The danger zone must always be defined for each tree. If several trees are being felled simultaneously, the separation needs to be at least 2.5 times the height of the tree. No bystanders must remain within this zone. The escape route, diagonally between the direction of felling, must be free of obstructions, such as brushwood. If the engine is cold, it must be started on the ground. Place one foot on the rear hand guard to steady the saw. If the saw is small or the engine warm, it can be started while gripping the handle between the thighs. Before making the first cut, remove any interfering growth and check that nobody is in the felling zone. Then decide on the precise direction of fall. The shape of the felling notch depends on the diameter of the trunk, its form, and the natural lean of the tree. One simple and reliable method is to start with a vertical guide cut pointing in the direction of fall. Then you cut away the buttress roots at the sides, up to the height of the bottom of the notch. Once the diameter of the trunk has been reduced like this, you can often use a shorter guide bar. It's usually best to leave the roots on the rear side, because then you can insert wedges sooner and get a better leverage. The felling notch is made at 90 degrees to the guide cut. That's easy to measure using the gunning sight on the saw. A skilled operator will know whether it's best to start with the horizontal cut or the upper angled cut. The important thing is that the two cuts should meet precisely without undercutting the hinge. The depth of notch should be about 1/5 of the diameter of the trunk. This is the side that the tree will fall. For trees that are small enough to be levered, there are two simple methods of making the felling cut. In the support method, the saw is inserted at an angle, and you can cut through the trunk parallel to the hinge, making sure you leave the right thickness of hinge. Proceed towards the rear of the tree, leaving a supporting pillar of about 1/8 of the diameter to one side of centre. After inserting the lever, you cut through that support, making the cut at a slight angle to the horizontal. Then lever the tree by standing up from the squatting position. Keep your back straight to minimize the effort and strain. The offset method is similar. Insert the upper edge of the saw into the trunk and cut through 2/3 of the diameter as far as the hinge. Remove any sawdust by drawing the saw backwards out of the cut. That makes it easier to insert the felling lever. Once the lever is in place, cut through the remaining 1/3. The lever prevents the cut closing up and trapping the bar of the saw. Make the last cut at a shallow angle to ensure that the saw cannot touch the lever. That would seriously damage the chain or cause the saw to kick back. When the trunk diameter is less than twice the length of the guide bar, you can also use the sectioning method. Start the plunge cut with the lower edge of the saw. With the upper edge, cut forward to the hinge. Then work round to the other side. Insert wedges as necessary. Keep the bar as flat as possible to minimize the risk of kickback. The wedges prevent the cut closing up and trapping the saw as you proceed. The height of the hinge step should be 1/10 of the diameter of the trunk, or a minimum of a couple of inches in the case of large trees. If the trunk diameter is more than twice the length of the guide bar, the method is to cut into the heartwood from the notch side. As you're working with the nose of the saw, there's a risk of kickback. That happens if the last quarter of the bar meets with sudden resistance. The saw is then pushed violently outwards or sideways and can easily injure the operator. The correct method of making a plunge cut is to start the cut with the underside of the nose, then rotate the bar gradually into the kerf and complete the fan-shaped cut. The heartwood cut should be made at the height of the hinge, and the felling cut then made in the same plane. Take care to leave an adequate width of hinge. Withdraw the saw from time to time to check the hinge. The saw tends to draw itself into the cut. Use the spiked bumper as a pivot and rotate the saw around it. That reduces the effort and allows a tree to absorb the vibration. Special care is needed when felling trees suspected of being rotten. Damaged bark can be an indication of that. The tree also sounds dull when struck. In this case, the felling notch may have to be made rather larger so as to extend into sound wood. Leave a broader hinge and do not make any sapwood cuts. Then it's easier to control the direction of fall. In the case of a backward leaner, you again start with a plunge cut at the side. Insert wedges after completing 50 to 60% of the felling cut. Then continue until you reach the other side of the hinge. Drive in the wedges evenly until the tree starts to topple. The forward leaner is very similar, but keep the notch as small as possible. The felling cut is again a plunge cut. If the tree is small and leaning only slightly, make the cut from one side to the hinge. Continue the cut from behind you until you sever the last fibers. In the case of larger trees, make the final cut from the outside. Then you can step back quickly as the tree starts to fall. If the tree trunk is under tension, then there's an increased risk because it can whip viciously when the forces are relieved. Such work must only be carried out by experienced operators. It's essential to work only from the compression side. First, cut through about a third of the width from the top downwards. Then use the upper edge of the saw to cut through the lower half of the tree. The remaining portion is cut diagonally from above, always standing on the compression side. The tree then moves in the other direction without endangering the operator. If necessary, first secure the roots with hawsers attached to a tractor or other trees to prevent it moving in the wrong direction. On a slope, where the trunk can roll, make the initial cut on the downhill side. The operator stands on the uphill side. Leave a band of uncut timber on the compression side to prevent the saw being pinched. Lopping branches requires an ergonomically designed saw, compact and narrow, lightweight, and with a short cutting bar. First, remove the whiskers, if not done immediately after felling. You can measure the length and diameter of the tree as you go. If required, mark off at predetermined lengths. When you reach the top end, note the length and check the diameter. Add a bit for wastage if necessary and lop the top. Mark the center line and measure the diameter with the calipers. This rational method is only possible if you carry the necessary tools on a belt. Mark the dimensions and the quality, if required, on the base of the trunk. If there were branches on the underside that couldn't be reached, roll the tree and continue lopping. Lopping is a time-consuming job, so it's important to use a safe and efficient technique. The lever method is appropriate for thin softwood. The individual steps depend on the height and arrangement of the branches. Ideally, it's possible to lop in 12 steps with an additional cut under the tree, as shown here. With a greater separation between branches at a given angle, lopping can be divided into 3 or 6 steps, depending on the pattern. Important points are a safe stance and a comfortable working height. Rest the saw on the trunk and never cut on your side of the trunk while moving forwards. This is the right way to hold the saw. Always grip the front handle with your left hand, including thumb. Operate the throttle with your right index finger or thumb, depending on the angle of the saw. Keep your right wrist straight. Rest the saw on the trunk or your thigh. Never use the nose of the saw, as it could kick back. With large or medium-sized trees lying on the ground, you can swap between the lever and parting method, depending on the situation. With the parting method, start at the upper middle of the trunk. Then lop the branches on each side. Where the branches are thick, you'll often have to shorten them first, so as to relieve the tension and prevent the bar being pinched. This also makes the branches more accessible. Always keep the bar on the opposite side of the trunk while moving forwards. Consistent high performance requires regular maintenance. At the end of each working day, you should invest a bit of time in a brief but thorough inspection of the saw. Regular cleaning of the air filter is important for optimum performance and low fuel consumption. The depth gauge is ideal for cleaning the chain groove, oil drillings and assembly holes. You need to take particular care of the chain. Only if it's in perfect running order will it cut well, with minimum vibration and low risk of kickback. Start with a visual check. Then measure the shortest tooth and file all the cutting teeth to a uniform length. Check the height of the depth stop with a gauge. It may have to be trimmed. If the depth stop is filed down too much, the result is increased vibration and risk of kickback. If you need to round the tops, that can be combined with the last stroke of the file. Finally, the chain is set to the correct tension. The quick stop brake should also be checked regularly. Finish off with a functional test. You can tell that the chain lubrication is working correctly from the trail of oil that splashes onto a pale background. When operating a chainsaw, you bear responsibility for your own safety and, just as important, for the safety of other people and their property. So let's just go over some of the basic safety rules that it's important to observe. Follow precisely the instruction booklet for your model concerning use, care and maintenance. You must also observe any legal requirements in your country. Don't use a saw that is not fully functional and reliable. It's essential to wear full protective clothing. Make sure there's always at least one other person within shouting distance, but outside the immediate danger zone. No smoking while using the chainsaw. The operator must also be in good health and capable of quick reactions. Operate the quick stop brake before starting the engine. That also applies when carrying the saw or putting it down with the engine running. Always hold the saw with your right hand on the rear handle and your left hand on the upper handle. Grip with fingers and thumbs in each case. For every situation, you need to make the appropriate preparations before starting work. For example, clear the escape paths. Discuss the direction of fall with your colleagues. Choose the best method of cutting. Take special care with plunge cuts or when cutting up timber under tension. Always try to minimize the risk of kickback. Never cut through the hinge. Its dimensions depend on the diameter of the tree, the way it's growing, and the type of timber. As soon as a tree starts to fall, apply the brake and step back. Keep an eye on the crown of the tree, maintaining a safe distance, because branches can fall off or be thrown up on impact with the ground. Always be aware of any potential dangers not directly connected with a chainsaw, such as weather conditions and visibility, the terrain and type of soil, obstructions such as power lines, vehicles and machinery in the working area. A modern chainsaw has been designed for ergonomic, rational and above all, safe operation. Innovative technology and well thought out techniques and methods save time and reduce the strain on both workers and the environment. We at STIHL will continue to do all we can to make forestry work even safer and even more cost-effective in future.